Hello and welcome to this video where I'm going to be ranking every single game that's currently in my PS2 collection. I've done a couple of these videos before. I've done one for my Switch collection, I've done one for my PS1 collection, and I've done one for my PS4 collection too, so this will be the fourth video in this sort of ongoing series, I suppose. But anyway, let's crack on with it by taking a look at the first game. I've organised these alphabetically as well, because that's just an order that makes sense, I suppose. So the first game is 007 Nightfire. I remember this being good, but I've not played it in years. I feel like this is one of those PS2 games that literally everybody has played who grew up in this era. I think it was quite an early PS2 game, that's probably why a lot of people ended up getting this. But yeah, I do remember it being good. I remember the multiplayer being a lot of fun too. Probably one of the better first-person shooters available on the console, actually. So, just to set a sort of benchmark, I think I'm going to put this in B. Then we move on to 007 Everything or Nothing, which was actually a little bit different to Nightfire. This one was a third-person shooter, and it had sort of like elements of stealth going on as well. I remember it being pretty rudimentary, but what makes this one a little bit more special is that this one actually had a co-op mode that you could do in two-player split screen. And I remember having a lot of fun with that. So for that reason alone, I think I am actually going to put this in the same rank as Nightfire, even though generally I don't think this one's considered to be anywhere near as good. I had a lot of fun with the co-op, so I think it deserves to be the same rank, really. Then we've got Alien Hominid, which I think actually later got a release on the Xbox 360 like arcade. It was like a downloadable title, which is kind of more suited to being that as opposed to a full-on PS2 game. But I do remember it being pretty good, if not just a little bit too simple. It's like a run and gun sort of game, kind of like, I guess, Contra. Probably a little bit more fast-paced than the older Contra games anyway. But yeah, I remember it being good, but the main thing I enjoyed about this game was actually that there was like some mini-games, and one of the mini-games was like this little minimalist puzzle platformer, and I seem to remember having more fun with that minigame than what I had with the actual game. So I think for that reason I'm going to put it in C, just because the main game isn't really my cup of tea. I'm not really that big on the like shoot 'em up games, to be honest. So yeah, it's probably quite good, but it's just not really for me. Ape Escape 3. I'm definitely putting this in either A or S. I'm going to put it in A for now, just because I'm not quite sure if it's deserving of the S rank. I need to have a look what other games are going to go in that category. But I've done a full review of Ape Escape 3, and I absolutely love it. I think it's probably one of the best platformers on the PS2, actually. And I actually think the Ape Escape series in general is pretty underrated. And I would like to see a new one, either like a Ape Escape 4, or just a remake of the first one, or maybe even a remake of the entire trilogy. That would be cool. But we'll have to wait and see if that'll ever come to fruition, I guess. Buster Block, I'm gonna just immediately put that in D. From what I remember, it's not that it's a particularly bad game or anything. It's just that it's basically just Breakout, you know, the game where you've got like the paddle at the bottom and a ball is coming down the screen and you just have to hit it back up to destroy all the blocks. It's literally just a PS2 version of that with some like fancy graphics. But yeah, that's basically all it is. It's a little bit too simple in my opinion. So yeah, it's not that it's bad, it's just that it's a bit too minimal, I guess. Then we've got all of the Buzz games that I own. I actually don't really know why I own so many of these. I think it's just a situation where I already had the Buzzers. So whenever I saw one of the games in the series for like 50p, I just picked it up. So firstly we've got the first Buzz game, which was the music quiz, which is kind of weird. You would think that the first Buzz game would have been just a general knowledge one. But yeah, with this being just music, it's probably not as good as some of the other ones, so I'm actually going to put this one in C, I guess. Then we've got the big quiz, which was the second one. And with this being a more general quiz, it's probably a little bit better. So I'm gonna put this one in... You know what, I might put it in C as well, just because it feels a little bit weird putting a Buzz game in B, when there's probably going to be loads of other, like, better PS2 games that are more deserving of the B rank, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I'm also going to put that in C. I'm thinking that I'm probably just going to put all of these in C, to be honest, because they are all fundamentally exactly the same game, just with, like, updated questions. So then we've got the Mega Quiz, which is, again, just a general knowledge one. We've got the Hollywood Quiz, which is a film one. And then we've got this weird one called Buzz Jr. Monster Rumble, which I don't know if I've ever actually played this, to be honest. But I think it's just a more kid-friendly version of the Buzz games, with questions that are a lot easier. I'm not sure if this one is actually themed around monsters. I think it's just that the characters are monsters, to be honest. But yeah, not sure I've ever actually played that one. Then we move on to the Crash Bandicoot games, which are obviously massive on the PS2. It was coming off of the back of the PS1 Crash games, which were obviously really highly acclaimed. So yeah, these obviously did really well at the time, although I think towards the end of the PS2 era, they did start to, like, nosedive in quality a bit, with, like, Crash of the Titans and Mind Over Mutant. But let's start with Wrath of Cortex. Now, even though this was basically just a rip-off of Crash Bandicoot 3, I actually do kinda like Wrath of Cortex, almost because it's a rip-off of Crash Bandicoot 3. They couldn't really go too wrong with it, I guess. It does have flaws, like I feel like the controls are way too floaty. I feel like some of the vehicle sections are really, like, tedious and difficult for no reason. So, yeah, I'm thinking that this one probably deserves to be in... Maybe... feels a bit harsh putting it in C. For now, I'm going to put it in B, but I'll probably shuffle some of these around, I guess. Crash Nitro Kart, I've done a review of this one on the channel as well. This, like Wrath of Cortex, this one is a rip-off of Crash Team Racing, only it's nowhere near as good as Crash Team Racing, primarily just because the controls aren't as good. I feel like if they would have replicated the controls from Team Racing a lot better, this one would probably be a much better game. But yeah, because they ruined the controls, it's just not really very good, and because it just follows the exact same structure as Team Racing, you literally might as well just play Crash Team Racing, to be honest. So yeah, I'm thinking that I'm going to put this one in C. Crash Twinsanity is actually one of the games in the series that I've not played for an extremely long time. But I remember this being pretty good, and a lot of people online say that this one's pretty good as well, even though it's famously kind of unfinished. Like, a lot of stuff was cut from it, and stuff like that. But regardless of that, I feel like I'm going to put this one in B, so it matches the Wrath of Cortex. Crash Tag Team Racing, it breaks away from the Crash Team Racing style a bit, but because of that it's kind of too simple. It loses a lot of what made Crash Team Racing so special. Like, there wasn't really any, like, drifting mechanic that I can remember anyway, and it was replaced with this sort of fusing mechanic where you could join your cart into another person's cart, and one of you was basically on a turret and the other person was driving. It's an interesting idea, but it was just kinda poorly executed, and it's so easy to just, like, break the game and make it, like, really, really easy to come first all the time. So yeah, I think for that reason I've kind of got to put it below Crash Nitro Kart, because I do think that Nitro Kart is better, despite it being a rip-off of Team Racing. Crash of the Titans and Crash Mind Over Mutant, I feel like I can't really justify ranking these because I've actually never played them. But from what I've seen, they don't look like my kind of games at all. They're basically like platformer beat-em-up hybrids, and I don't really like beat-em-up games. I think that they're quite boring and tedious. And you're just kind of doing the same thing throughout the entire game, in most of them anyway. So I'm thinking that I'm probably, for now at least, going to put these in F. I am eventually going to review all of the Crash games, the ones that I've not already reviewed anyway. So maybe my opinion of these will change. And like I say, I can't really rank these properly because I've not played them. So yeah, for now I'm going to put them in F. Now the Destroy All Humans games, I actually really fondly remember these. I didn't like the remake that came out really recently of Destroy All Humans 1. Just because I feel like in a lot of ways it was worse than the original. But the original PS2 version is still pretty good, from what I remember. And like I say, in a lot of ways it's actually better than the remake. So I feel like for that reason I'm going to put this one in B, because although it's good, it is still quite flawed. Like, you need to grind a little bit in order to progress through the game, whereas they could have just have made it so that you could go straight to the next level without like having a certain amount of DNA, which is a collectible in the game. So yeah, I'm going to put that one in B. Destroy All Humans 2. Now, this one isn't really talked about as much as Destroy All Humans 1. And I think that that's weird, because I do remember Destroy All Humans 2 being better. It had more weapons. I remember the structure being a lot better. I remember it being easier to find all of the collectibles. You had access to some more abilities and stuff, and it also had a co-op mode. The co-op mode was kind of just tacked on. It wasn't like really good or anything, but still it was there if you wanted to mess about with it. So really, for that reason, I'm kind of torn between putting it in A or putting it in B. I think I'm going to put it in B because it's just not as good as Ape Escape 3. But it would be like Destroy All Humans 2 would be a B+, and Destroy All Humans 1 would probably be a B-, if you get what I mean. Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure. I've reviewed this one on the channel as well. Quite a lot of these PS2 games I've reviewed. But yeah, this game uses the same engine as Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, and for that reason it's actually pretty good. The levels aren't anywhere near as well designed as the levels from the proper Tony Hawk games, obviously, but some of them are pretty interesting. I remember some of the Toy Story ones in particular being quite good. And it's just interesting seeing what is fundamentally a Tony Hawk game come out in an era where the Tony Hawk games was probably at their peak, but it wasn't made by the standard team that made the Tony Hawk games. Just a weird little interesting oddity this game is. I think I'm going to put it in C, just because it's good, but it's probably not quite as good as some of the other Tony Hawk games that are going to go in B later on. So let's move on now to the Grand Theft Auto games. I don't know why I don't have Vice City Stories. That's the only PS2 one that I'm missing. I did have it on PSP, actually, but yeah, that doesn't really matter. Grand Theft Auto 3. I'm probably gonna put this one in A. This was kind of the game that, for me, defined the PS2 era, I guess. Like, it was reasonably early in the PS2's life that Grand Theft Auto 3 came out, and I just remember being absolutely blown away by it when I played it at a friend's house, because I only had a PS1 at the time, and like, looking at that game, it kind of just like made the jump from the PS1 to the PS2 seem so massive, because obviously the scale of Grand Theft Auto 3. It just wouldn't be possible on PS1 hardware. And so yeah, just for that reason, really, I think it's deserving of at least an A rank. It has its flaws, like obviously it's dated by today's standards. There's quite a lot of like texture pop-in, and the shooting isn't very good, to be honest. But yeah, for the time, Grand Theft Auto 3 was amazing, and so many other games just like copied elements from it. It's ridiculous. Grand Theft Auto Vice City I didn't actually play as much, but by all accounts it's better, and I do remember it being better. I remember it just having way more like expanded stuff, like you could like purchase properties, there was more weapons, there was more vehicles. Yeah, I think Vice City was the first one where you could drive like helicopters and stuff as well, which you couldn't do in Grand Theft Auto 3. So yeah, I'm going to put this one in A, just because obviously it needs to be the same as Grand Theft Auto 3, if not higher. San Andreas is obviously the one that like everybody considers to be the best of the PS2 era Grand Theft Auto games. Again, like with Vice City, I actually didn't play this one as much, but from what I have played, it is extremely good. And I'm thinking that this is probably going to be the first S rank game, just because it is so much more expanded from what you could do in Vice City or 3. The story was arguably a lot better, and yeah, it was probably one of the first really big open world games of this style. So yeah, I feel like I need to put this one in S. Now, Liberty City Stories was actually a PSP game that was later ported to PS2, and for that reason it's not as expansive as San Andreas, but it uses the same like level designs as Grand Theft Auto 3, only they're like tweaked a bit because obviously it's a different game. And for that reason I always kind of liked this one, because Grand Theft Auto 3 was the one I played the most. So just playing like a different game using the same levels was always really interesting to me. I don't think the PS2 version runs very well from what I remember. Like, I remember the frame rate being really bad. I don't know whether that's actually the case or whether that's just my memory being bad, but yeah, I don't remember this running very well. So because of that, and because it's kind of like a step backwards, I think I'm going to put this one in B, even though I do have fond memories of it. In fact, I actually think that that Liberty City Stories was the first Grand Theft Auto game that I ever actually finished. So yeah, there's that. Oh god. Now we move on to all of the Hugo games. These are going to be difficult to rank actually, because these actually like pretty drastically differ in quality. But Bookazum, I do remember that one being actually one of the better ones in the PS2 lineup. This one was like a kart racer, but instead of having like tracks, it was just big open areas, sort of like battle arenas, that you did different objectives in. Which is a fairly interesting idea, actually, but it's just not particularly well executed, at least in my opinion. So yeah, I think I'm going to put this one... in D. I don't really think it... In fact, even putting it in D next to Tag Team Racing seems wrong. So maybe I should just put it in F, but then if I put that one in F, they all need to go in F. Which, to be fair, looking at them, maybe that is the case. Maybe they are all F games. So yeah, I'm actually going to put that there, just because Tag Team Racing is so much better than Bookazum, obviously. Cannon Cruise wasn't very good at all. Agent Hugo, again, that was very, very bad. Robo Rumble, now, that might have turned out to have been the best one on the PS2, actually. Robo Rumble was, again, a kart racer, but it was a lot more just like standard. It just used normal tracks. And I think for that reason it was probably a little bit better than Bookazum. It also had a boss fight at the end, which I wasn't expecting. That was kind of interesting to see. So yeah, even though it is probably the best game of the Hugo ones on the PS2, I still feel like I need to put it in F, because it's not as good as Crash Tag Team Racing. Lemon Twist and Hula Holiday were both 3D platformers, but they just weren't very good. They felt so dated, it's unbelievable. They felt more like a bad PS1 game than a PS2 game, if you get what I mean. And then this last one, which is Hugo Magic in the Troll Woods, was a 2D platformer, but again, it just wasn't very good. The controls were awful, it just didn't have like very good combat or enemies. So yeah, again, that one's just gonna have to go in F. I have reviewed all of the Hugo games on PS2 actually, so yeah, if you're interested in a much more detailed opinion of them, you can always check out those videos. Then we've got International Q Club, which is a snooker game, and I literally don't know why I have this. This is a game that I've owned since I was a kid, and I'm not really into pool or snooker or anything, so I don't know why I've got this. But I mean, for a snooker game, it's pretty good. It has like all of the standard modes, and it also has this like mode where you play on weird tables that are like obstacle courses, and you need to reach the end, I guess. So yeah, I guess it's as good as Buster Block, so I'm gonna put it there. Now that I'm looking at this properly, I'm beginning to feel like I put Crash Tag Team Racing way too far down. Like, I feel like Tag Team Racing is better than like Alien Hominid, for example. So yeah, I'm actually going to change that. I'm going to put that in C, which makes it on the same level as Nitro Kart. But again, I think this is an example where Nitro Kart is a C plus and Tag Team Racing is a C minus. So I think that makes sense. Jak 2 and Jak 3, yeah, weirdly I don't actually own the first Jak game. I have played it and it's really good. But yeah, for some reason I just don't have it on PS2. So Jak 2 and 3 are the ones that we're actually going to be ranking. Jak 2, I don't think is as good as Jak 3 from what I remember. But again, I've not played these in quite a long time, so I could be very wrong with that. I just remember Jak 3 having a lot more sort of like variety. There was a whole other area that you went to that was like this desert where you drove like cars around, whereas Jak 2 was just set in the main city. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put Jak 2 in, I think I'm going to put it in C, and then I'm going to put Jak 3 in B, because I do think that Jak 3 is better. But then that's too harsh on Jak 2, actually, looking at the other games that are there. So again, I'm going to put that in B as well. If Jak 1 was here, I'd probably be putting that in A, to be honest. Because Jak 1 was more of like a standard platformer. It didn't have any elements of like shooting or anything, like Jak 2 and 3 do. And I think for that reason it's a little bit more up my alley. I enjoy the first game a lot more. So yeah, I think that makes sense. Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. Now, with this, I could get really complicated here, and I could say that the PS2 version of Kingdom Hearts 1 just isn't really worth playing anymore. And the reason for that is that the PS3 and PS4 remasters of it are just so much better. Not only do you have all of the content that was exclusive to the final mix version, which was only released in Japan, initially anyway, but also they changed the camera controls, and they updated the like interface to be a little bit more like Kingdom Hearts 2. Which ultimately just means that this PS2 version of Kingdom Hearts 1 is just completely inferior. You might as well just go with the PS3 or 4 versions at this point. But having said that, at the time it was released initially, it was very good. So do I take all of the remasters into consideration here or not? I think I'm going to. And just for the reason that it's like just such an inferior version by today's standards, I'm gonna put it in C. But then Kingdom Hearts 2, I think going from the original version to the remasters, there's not as much of a difference. Again, you've got the final mix content in the remasters that isn't in the original, so again, it is still inferior. But yeah, for the most part, this is a lot more similar to the remaster than what the first game is. So yeah, I think I'm going to put this one in B. London Racer 2 and London Racer World Challenge. The only reason that I've even got these is because my girlfriend was a fan of the first one on PS1, so we saw these in a shop for really cheap and just picked them up to see what they're like. They're basically really not very good racing games, so I mean really, I might as well just put them in F, because they've got really nothing going for them over any of the main racing games on PS2. Like, there's almost literally no reason to play this at all. Like, really, you might as well just get a better racing game. Max Payne 1 and 2 are obviously classics of the PS2. I've only played Max Payne 1, and my plan was to go through Max Payne 1, 2, and 3. But I just never ended up finishing Max Payne 1. And I think the reason for that at the time was that I didn't have like HD upscalers or anything, and I remember the graphics just looking really like muddy because I was playing them on like a PC monitor or something at the time. So yeah, that kind of put me off. But yeah, I don't know why I've not given it a second chance since then. So yeah, I can't really rank these ones properly because I've not played them. So I might just put them, based on what I've played, I'm going to put them in B, I suppose, because I think that that's fair. Like, the first one was good, but it was just the graphics were putting me off, because I wasn't playing them right, basically. So yeah, I'm going to put them both in B, even though I've never played Max Payne 2. Then we move on to the Metal Gear Solid games. I've actually got all of the PS2 Metal Gear Solid games, including the like updated versions. So with this is a weird one, because obviously Metal Gear Solid 2 is an absolutely incredible game, but then you've got Metal Gear Solid 2 Subsistence, which is basically just a better version. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put the ultimately better version of it in S, and I'm going to put the original version in A, just because the updated version is just quite clearly better. With Metal Gear Solid 3 it's the same thing, so I'll put the original version... Actually, you know what I might do here, actually, is put the original version of Metal Gear Solid 3 in B, because the original version of 3 used this sort of overhead camera angle that was used in Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, but in 3, because the world and the levels are a lot more open, this overhead angle doesn't really work properly, and I feel like it actually kind of ruins the game going back to that version today. So I'm going to put that in B, and then I'm going to put Substance, which was the updated version that had a better camera, which you could just move like all around you like in a normal 3D game. I'm going to put that one in S. Metal Gear Solid 2, and in particular Metal Gear Solid 3 actually, are probably two of the best games that I've ever played, not just on the PS2 but just in general. Metal Gear Solid 3 actually is one of the only games that managed to actually make me cry when I first played it, so yeah, it has that. And Metal Gear Solid 2 has a moment that like almost made me cry, but it didn't quite manage it, but still, that's quite a feat, that's quite an accomplishment for both of those games. Monster Attack is, I believe, I could be wrong on this, but Monster Attack I think is the first game in the Earth Defense Force series, before it was called Earth Defense Force, and it's pretty good, and it has the co-op mode that Earth Defense Force is kind of famous for. But I do remember the frame rate like taking serious hits when there's a lot of enemies on the screen. And of course, a lot of the time there's a lot of enemies on the screen because that's kind of what the games are about. So yeah, I think really the later games in the series are potentially a lot better than this original version. So you might as well just go with one of the later games over this one. And for that reason, I feel like I kinda have to put this in D, just because it's really just an inferior version of any of the other Earth Defense Force games. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 is probably one of the first racing games that I ever played that I actually really liked, like outside of kart races, that is. And I remember having a lot of fun with this, and I haven't played it in a long time, but seeing as this is probably the best racing game on this particular list, I feel like I need to rank this one at least a little bit high. Yeah, like I think I'm going to put this one in B. Looking at the quality of the other games there, I think that makes sense. I liked the novelty of like the cops chasing you and setting up traps while you're just trying to like win the race and come in first. I think that was kind of cool. It had a really good multiplayer mode as well. In fact, it had a multiplayer mode where one of you played as the cops and one of you was just racing, which is a really cool idea, I think. So yeah, probably the best racing game that's on this particular list. Way better than London Racer, that's for sure. Red Dead Revolver is one that I just can't rank this because I've literally never played it. I ended up really liking Red Dead Redemption 2, and that was the first one that I played. And I basically just wasn't expecting to like it at all. So then when I finished it, I went back and I got all of the Red Dead games. So I got Red Dead Revolver and the first Redemption. And I've played a bit of the first Redemption, but I've actually not played Revolver yet. I know it's very different, it's not really anything like the Redemption games, but I figured just for the sake of going back to where it started, I would pick this one up. But yeah, because I can't rank it properly, I'm going to put it in F. Not because it's bad, but just because I can't rank it anywhere else. And the same thing pretty much goes for these next three games. I got these three for quite cheap, and the reason that I picked these up is because at some point in the future I want to review all three of them, because I just think that would be quite interesting. With the first one, Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people played this one. I think this was a really popular game back when the PS2 first came out. But Mystery Mayhem and Unmasked, I had never even heard of these ones, but they're basically like spiritual sequels to Night of 100 Frights. So I thought that they would be interesting to take a look at, like a sort of trilogy of Scooby-Doo games. Yeah, but because I've never played any of them, I'm gonna have to put them in F. Then we move on to a game that I'm actually playing right now for a review. So I've just finished up my review of Silent Hill 1, and so now I'm going on to the second one, obviously. And yeah, I don't really want to ruin what I think about it, just because I am in the middle of doing a full-on review of it. But it is very good, as you can imagine. I really like it. So I think for now, I've not finished it yet, so I can't really rank it properly because I feel like it's a game that you really need to finish before you can have a proper opinion of it. But yeah, I'm going to put it in A. I definitely think it's at least an A or an S. At this point. The Simpsons Road Rage is basically a Crazy Taxi clone, and it's another one of those games that a lot of people played just because it was released really early in the PS2's life. And I played it recently actually in the multiplayer mode, and it seems to have aged reasonably well, but it is very basic, like there's not really a lot to do in it. But for a Simpsons fan, it's pretty cool, like getting to visit all of these like iconic places in like a 3D space. And I think it was actually as well one of the first genuinely quite good Simpsons games. So I think I'm going to put this one in... Yeah, I think it's deserving of B. Yeah. But then we move on to The Simpsons Hit and Run, which is basically just better than Road Rage. It had a lot more going on. It was kind of a Grand Theft Auto clone in the way that you could get out of the car and like do some side stuff. But the meat of it was just about the driving. But yeah, it had a more like in-depth Springfield to explore where you could go into like buildings and like interact with stuff, which was really, really cool at the time. And to this day, it's probably been the best Simpsons game ever made. But as well as that, it's kind of a good game in its own right, from what I remember. So for that reason, again, I think I'm going to put this one in B, just because putting it in A among the ranks of like Ape Escape 3, Grand Theft Auto, Metal Gear Solid doesn't feel right. So I'm going to put that in B. But again, it's a situation where Hit and Run would be a B+, and Road Rage would be a B-. The Sly games are all extremely good. The second one in particular, I'm just right now, I'm going to put that in S. I actually think that that's one of the best 3D platformers that I've ever played. And one day I definitely want to review all of the Sly games. Sly 1 is quite different to the other two, because it's a bit more sort of like linear, whereas the other two had this more open world thing going on. But it's still really good. So I think I'm going to put that in... I think I'm going to put it in A, actually. I really like Sly 1. And Sly 3, again, I'm going to put that one in A. It's not quite as good as Sly 2, in my opinion, but I still really, really enjoyed it. Now we come to another game that I don't know why I own it. I've never been a fan of wrestling at all. I just can't get into it. So why do I own this game? I've got no idea. I don't remember ever buying it, but it's been in my collection for years, somehow. I remember having a bit of fun with this in the multiplayer, but I never really like learnt how to play it properly. So I don't know, it's not really my thing. I don't even like fighting games, really. So I think I'm going to put this one in F for me. The Spider-Man 2 movie tie-in game is considered like one of the best movie tie-in games ever made, and I have to agree. It's really good, and it obviously really heavily inspired the PS4 Spider-Man game as well. Now it has dated a little bit, so I'm not going to rate it in the A rank, but I am going to put it in the B rank. I think it's another one of those examples of it being a B+ game. And Ultimate Spider-Man was kind of just like a spiritual successor to Spider-Man 2. It used a vastly different art style, and it did a few things differently, like you could play as Venom in this one. But it's just not quite as good as Spider-Man 2. But at the same time, I'm still going to put it in the B rank, because it is still really good, and it is still one of the better Spider-Man games. The Splinter Cell trilogy I played, but a very, very long time ago. Like, I think I played Splinter Cell 1 when it first came out, and I've not really touched it since. So my memory of this is extremely hazy. But I do remember it being pretty good. And I remember all three of them being pretty good, actually, at the time. It's probably a case, though, where if I was to go back and play them now, they wouldn't be as good as I actually remember them being. That's probably why I've never gone back and played them, to be honest. But just judging them from memory, I feel like they kind of have to go in B rank, just because they are good, and they were kind of like... It was like the first stealth franchise that I feel like was a sort of competitor to Metal Gear Solid. Not really in terms of like the story or anything, but just in terms of being like a big budget stealth game. Because Metal Gear Solid was really the first one of that kind. It sort of in a way invented the stealth genre, really. So yeah, Splinter Cell was kind of like the competitor, I guess. It was never as good, but it was still pretty fun in its own right. Don't know why Splinter Cell moved over there, but whatever, we'll leave it. It's in the right rank. Then we move on to the PS2 Spyro games that I own. And I've not played this one, the Legend of Spyro: A New Beginning. I'm definitely going to get around to playing this at some point. But like with the later Crash Bandicoot games, it turns it into a beat-em-up, which I'm not a fan of. But because I've not played it, I'm just going to put it in F, just because I can't rank it anywhere else. Then we've got Enter the Dragonfly and A Hero's Tale, which again I've reviewed on the channel. And neither of them are very good, at all. I'm actually going to put them both in D, because although there's elements of them that are enjoyable, they're just really not good. Like, I wouldn't ever play them again, put it that way. I've played them to 100% completion, and I've done with them forever. The SSX games are actually my girlfriend's, and I've never played them, which is probably a bit weird because I feel like everybody has played the SSX games, especially the third one, which I don't actually own. But yeah, I've never played them, so again I'm just going to have to put them in F, not because they're bad, but just because I can't rank them anywhere else. Now, the PS2 version of Super Monkey Ball Deluxe, again I've reviewed this, and I've also reviewed Super Monkey Ball Adventure. But the PS2 version of Deluxe is actually really, really bad. The version of the game that you want to go for is the original Xbox version, because it is just better in every single way. It's got better graphics, a better frame rate, better controls, better loading times, just everything about it is superior. So for that reason, I'm gonna put this one in D as well, just because it is literally the worst version of Super Monkey Ball that you can play. Super Monkey Ball Adventure, again, you know what, I'm just gonna put this straight in D as well. Not only is the PS2 version of this game probably worse than the other versions, but it's just not a very good game even when you're playing the best version of it. The version that I played was the GameCube version, so the PS2 version is a little bit different, actually. But, yeah, it's not very good from what I played, so I'm just going to put it in D. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games are beat-em-ups, so you already know that I'm not really going to be a big fan of these. But I think just the fact that it's based on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles gets me a little bit more interested. In fact, this version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like the one that was released at some point in the 2000s, is probably the version that I'm the most familiar with, just because it's the one that I grew up with. Obviously, the original, like, 80s version is the one that everybody really knows and loves. But I didn't really have a way of watching that one. I don't know if it was on TV in the UK when I was a kid. But yeah, I never really watched too many of them. This was the one that I grew up with, and this was the one that was on TV a lot. So yeah, this is the one that I have the fondest memories of. But anyway, I just went on a ramble there about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for no reason. But yeah, the games, they're beat-em-ups, and they're alright. They're okay. They have a decent co-op mode, which makes it a little bit more fun. So yeah, I think I'm going to put these in C. I remember the second game being a bit better than the first one, because it like had sort of like a better structure. It had more like collectibles and more to do other than beat up people. But yeah, they're about the same level of quality, really. Let's not kid ourselves. Then we've got the two Tenchu games. Now, ages and ages ago, I played through the first Tenchu game, and I really, really liked it. But having replayed it more recently, I don't understand why I liked it, because it's just so horribly dated that it's just almost unplayable. And my plan was, at the time, when I very first played it, My plan was to get them all and review them all, but I never got around to doing that, and so I never actually got around to playing these 2 games despite owning them. So again, this is an example of a game that I can't really rank properly. I would imagine that the PS2 games are a lot better than the PS1 games. Like, I would imagine that they've not dated as badly, but I can't say that for sure, so I'm just going to have to put them in F. Now we've got the PS2 Time Crisis games, including the spin-off, which is called Crisis Zone, which I actually picked up reasonably recently. I was looking for it in shops for ages, and then I finally came across it one day, so I had to pick that one up. All of these are really, really good. I mean, they're about the same level of quality, really, because they're all pretty much the same, just with like different levels to go through. But they're obviously based on the arcade games, they're light gun games, which I'm a big fan of. So I'm gonna put these in, I think B, because they're not like the best light gun games ever made, but they're still really, really fun. So yeah, I'm just gonna put them all there. There we go. Time Splitters 2. I played this a lot when I was younger, and you know, for some reason I never got the 3rd one, and by all accounts the 3rd one is probably one of the best first-person shooters ever made on the PS2. And a lot of people want to see like a remaster or just like a new Time Splitters game, which hopefully we'll get in the future, because it's definitely one of those series that deserves to make a comeback. But yeah, Time Splitters 2, even though it's considered to not be as good as the 3rd one, it's still really good from what I remember. So I think I'm going to put this one in... Let's see, what else have we got around? I think it's better than Nightfire, so I think just based on that, I'm going to need to put that in A. It had a really robust multiplayer mode as well. I think it even had like a thing where you could make like basic multiplayer maps, which was way ahead of its time. That's a really interesting component of it. So yeah, then we move on to all of the Tony Hawk's games, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, immediately I know where that's going. It's going in S. I personally think that it's the best game in the series, even including like the remake of 1 and 2. I still think that the original Pro Skater 3 is better, and I think it's just probably one of the best multiplayer games ever made, if not the best multiplayer game. So yeah, definitely deserving of S rank. 4, after I replayed this recently for a review, because I've reviewed Pro Skater 3 and 4, I actually was a little bit disappointed by this one because it wasn't as good as I remembered it being, but having said that, it is still pretty good. I think the main thing that lets Pro Skater 4 down is the fact that the maps aren't as good, because in a lot of ways it is better than Pro Skater 3. Like, you could argue that the mission structure of Pro Skater 4, with it being like a more open world, is better, although I would kind of debate the opposite, but you could argue that it's better. And also there's a lot more unlockables, and there's a much expanded moveset as well, which are all things that kind of make it better than Pro Skater 3, but when you don't have the maps to back it up, it really lets the game down. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in A. Still really good, not quite as good as Pro Skater 3 in my opinion. And then we move on to the Tony Hawk games that I've not reviewed yet. So Underground, Underground 2 and American Wasteland. From what I remember, these are all pretty damn good, but not as good as the Pro Skater games. Particularly with Underground 2 and American Wasteland. I think they went in a weird direction. Underground 2 was kind of like... It was kind of more about like pranks and like that sort of like jackass side of skate culture, rather than like the pro side of skate culture. And I just didn't really like the vibe it was going for. But the game itself, outside of that, is really, really good, as you would expect from the Tony Hawk games. So, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put Underground 1. I think I'm going to put Underground 1 in A. But then Underground 2, just because of what I just mentioned, I think I'm going to put in B. And then American Wasteland again, I'm going to put in B. Because I remember American Wasteland being a bit of a weird one, to be honest. Because it had like a story mode, like Underground and Underground 2. But you couldn't play as your creator skater. And it had these weird, like, elements that kind of got in the way of the game, where you could do like parkour and stuff. And I feel like it became a little bit too complicated for its own good, which arguably started with Underground 2, to be honest, because you had like other characters with like different vehicles and stuff like that, and even in Underground 1 there was sections where you like drove a car and stuff, and it just wasn't really as focused as the Pro Skater games. So yeah, I don't think that the Underground and American Wasteland games are as good as the originals, to be honest. Then we move on to the final games in the PS2 collection, which are the Worms games. These are the only 3 games in the entire Worms series, at least I think, that are in 3D. And I remember that being a really, really cool novelty at the time, because I was always a big fan of the original Worms games. I've got most of them on PS1, and I've also played the PC versions too. So to have got these games when they first came out and be playing Worms in 3D was amazing. Worms 4 Mayhem was easily the best. It easily had like the most customization, the most interesting story, and just felt the most like I guess it had the biggest scope. So let's start with that one. I think from what I remember, again this is a situation though where I've not played them in such a long time, but from what I remember, I'm actually going to put this in A, because I do remember it being legitimately really good. And again, it's one of those games that has a really good multiplayer mode too, so that goes to its advantage. Worms 3D is basically not as good as Worms 4, so for that reason I'm going to put it in B. And then we move on to Worms Forts, which was actually a bit different. It was in 3D, but it had this gimmick where in order to use all of the most powerful weapons, you had to be stood on like a building that you made, and you sort of had to like expand your base by building more and more buildings to take down the opponent's fort, which is interesting. And I know that that mode has like kind of returned in the more recent 2D games, but I think it was really at its best in this game because it was the focus of the entire game as opposed to just being attacked on mode. So yeah, it's good, but again it's not as good as Worms 4, so I'm going to put it in B alongside Worms 3D. And yeah, I think that finally wraps things up. We don't have many games in S, but that's obviously going to be the case. Very few games are of that level of quality to be put in the S rank. Yeah, I'm pretty happy looking at this. Quite a lot of games are in the C rank, but most of them are kind of just made up by the Buzz games. And you could consider that to just be one game, really, because every game is fundamentally the same. So yeah, most of the games are in B rank, which is good, because that makes them all good games. So I don't own many bad PS2 games, it seems. So yeah, overall I'm pretty happy with that collection. I've actually been like buying a lot more PS2 games recently, I think just because I've finally got a setup where I've got like a good HD upscaler, and it actually makes PS2 games look really good, whereas before when I was playing them, they always just looked a little bit rubbish. So yeah, because of that, I've actually been building up this collection quite a lot. The next games that I'm going to be adding to the collection are probably going to be Silent Hill 3 and 4, because I'm going to be reviewing them. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how this collection is going to grow in the future. But for now, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to see more stuff like this coming soon, and let me know down in the comments if you heavily disagree with where I've placed some of these games, or if you've got any recommendations for me as well. And until the next video, bye!